We are in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 through 19 this week, and love this text. Love the whole pursuit that Paul is urging Timothy to not only embrace himself to be content, but to cultivate contentment within his fellowship in Ephesus, the body of Christ, where he's a pastor. So Paul tells Timothy, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. We're going to look at two words, godliness and contentment. Godliness is the word eusebia. It's a compound word. Eu in the Greek means well or something done well. And seb, or in the larger version, sebenai, which means to revere, to be in awe, to see as sacred. So our relationship in following Jesus, spiritual formation, is all about embracing our pursuit to be godly, to be a reflection of who God is. It has the idea of both an internal reverence and awe of God that manifests itself in an external way. That's godliness. In other words, be like Jesus. That's kind of the simple version of that. Be like Jesus. How do you be like Jesus? How do you be godly? Well, godliness with contentment, being like Jesus, and knowing when enough is enough. That's the idea of contentment. Akeo is the Greek word, and it simply means to be satisfied, to know when enough is enough. And in this text, Paul's going to say, if you got food and clothing, that's enough. Be content with that. In other words, don't require a bunch of extra things to have satisfaction. My first point in this week's message is put spiritual formation above material accumulation. Put spiritual formation above spiritual accumulation. Now, by the time we get done with our week, and if you heard the sermon this week, you know the passage, the text, talks about those who are rich in this present world. Most of us are. So he's not saying it's bad, it's wrong to be rich in this present world. What's wrong is not to know why you're rich in this present world. Because if you're in pursuit of material accumulation, you will never learn to be content. You won't. Because enough is never enough. You've always got to have one more thing to be satisfied. But when spiritual formation is your priority, then you know when enough is enough. You're driven for God's purposes, not for human possessions. So think about another passage with me. So also in this same little book, back in chapter 4, verse 7, the Apostle Paul said to Timothy, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly. So there's our word eusebia again. So have nothing to do with godless. Have nothing to do with stories, ideas, concepts that leave God out. Have nothing to do with those. So when I have a pursuit of material acquisition as my pursuit, as my purpose in life, that's leaving God out. And I don't even know why I have it, and it's never enough. Whenever I have as my pursuit, my objective, spiritual formation, it reminds me of who I am. It attunes me to my real purpose in life, and I end up experiencing what Paul says in verse 6 is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. It's almost like an oxymoron. He's saying when you know that God is enough, when He's your priority, you're going to have more than enough. You're going to have great gain. Think of it like this. This text, written by the Apostle Paul, is his version of Matthew 6:33. You know, Matthew 6:33 is? Remember what that was? Jesus said, just after saying, don't worry about what you possess, don't worry about what you eat. The Father feeds the birds of the air. The Father clothes the lilies of the field. Don't worry about those things, but seek first my kingdom and righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you as well. This is basically Paul's version of what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6. He's saying, prioritize your spiritual formation, and you're going to experience great gain. You're going to have everything you need, and likely more than you need. And as we go forward this week, we're going to look at when God does bless us, and he has blessed us so much, what do we do with those blessings? How do we leverage those blessings? But before I can leverage the blessings, I have to leverage training, because training myself for godliness, for knowing and resting in God's presence, for being aware of his presence and reflecting that presence, is what's going to create within me a contented spirit, where others cannot just see me, but see God and his purposes flowing out of me. When that happens, at the end of the day, you know it's all been enough. I hope you'll experience his contentment today. Jesus, you are enough. I'll see you tomorrow.